Police officers of Reddit, what are you thinking when you see cases like George Floyd? Before we start with the video, like, subscribe and turn on notification bell on. For all the police officers here, what would the charges be if one of the bystanders pulled the police officer off of the poor guy? Assault on a police officer, obstruction of justice, and probably resisting arrest, depending on state laws of course. That gets tossed in as an easy one to charge, but usually gets pled off in court. I fear that if someone had intervened, that version of the story never would have received publicity. Death is a much more weighty headline. It's hard to intervene when there's no visible precedent of it being effective, and there is a strong precedent of reactive brutality. I wish we had positive stories available on the news in which de-escalation worked, but in a similar way to flattening the curve, it's so much harder to count saved lives than lost ones. I'm a police officer in California. I am absolutely disgusted by the officer's actions. When someone is in our custody, you must treat them properly. I don't care if they are arrested for murder or forgery. They are a human with a story, and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. I had tears streaming down my face watching the video of George Floyd. We swore to protect our communities, and that's what we set out to do every day. Putting a knee into the neck of a handcuffed man for an extended period of time isn't protecting. A man has lost his life due to the gross negligence of an evil person. May he rest in peace. Absolutely sick to my stomach. I'm a lieutenant in my hometown police department. I started my day by showing the video to my officers and making sure my people understood that this is murder, plain and simple. You never, outside of a life and death struggle, do anything like this. George Floyd was handcuffed and on the ground. If he was still struggling badly enough that they felt a need to hold him down, there's 100 ways to do it safely. Use of force should always be as measured and considered as possible. There will always be times where an officer sees danger and has to make a split-second decision without the luxury of weighing the consequences. That clearly was not the case here. He had all the time in the world to think about what he was doing. He had multiple people there telling him to stop. And none of his fellow officers intervened. All of that is why I find this incident particularly disgusting. They had so many chances to do the right thing. Luckily, I have the fortune of working with good people who see the shit for what it is. Before the video was over, before I told them that George Floyd died because of this, my officers were muttering things like, "What the fuck is he doing? You can't do that, and he needs to get off the man's fucking neck." Made me way prouder to be their leader than any number of arrests they could make to see that their instincts were not to defend the officer. For what it's worth, I'm glad that they were fired. I've heard mention in this thread that one of the officers has been arrested, which is great if true. I hope they're all brought to justice. Their actions, and lack thereof, were completely unconscionable. Cop here. Disgusted. There are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't have happened. Simple, easy, steps that should have been taken. Lessons that policing has learned over the past 200 years and basic things taught in every academy. Make no mistake, this was murder. Maybe not premeditated murder, but nonetheless murder. I will be angry if those officers do not get indicted. He's apparently been involved in at least 2 other deaths, including shooting a fleeing suspect in the back. I dunno, given that history, premeditation seems reasonable. That is inexcusable. Retired after 28 years. Nothing less than murder. All the guys I worked with would never have considered doing something like that. You treat combative in custodies once they're secured as human beings. Nothing should be personal. Once they've been subdued and you are safe as an officer, you stand him up, pat him down, and understand that your arrestee is at a low point in his life. Give him some dignity and you'll generally get his respect. It works 90+% of the time. That man was subdued and nobody should have been on him at that point. The key phrase I keep hearing reading in these cases, whether bad cop directly suffocates, strangles someone or fibrillates their heart with a taser, or cracks their skull or maybe didn't touch them at all, is, "I can't breathe." Seems to me that this phrase should be an automatic emergency ambulance ride. You shouldn't look at someone who is having difficulty breathing and then, for example, sit on them, on top of hot asphalt. You get them medical attention before they drop dead. That is, if you don't want them to die. But it takes time for the ambulance to get there. Which is why you put someone complaining of breathing problems in a position other than one that causes positional asphyxiation. Arresting someone who isn't willing to be arrested is a violent process. But once they're in handcuffs, the hard part is over, and it's time to chill out and act like a professional. Not a local, I'm a federal 5 years into the job. George Floyd was murdered and it's disgusting. We're trained that anything involving the neck is a no-go and is considered deadly force. We were also trained that if you make an arrest in a prone position, you search and then immediately move them onto their side or a seated position because the risk of asphyxiation is so great. If a suspect says they can't breathe, believe them and take measures to correct to it. This training is reinforced at least twice a year in our use of force training. These officers deserve to spend the rest of their lives in prison. I was a cop in the military. In the police academy, this was one of the things that taught us not to do, as it could crush the windpipe. The only time I was ever taught to use chokes and neck holds was in combat training for deployment stop, but when we got back we always had to attend retraining classes to relearn what we can do stateside. It's amazing that time and time again you see military saying this is exactly not what to do, but for some reason the civilian trainers seem to forget to teach the same. Would I rather be a POW to an American soldier versus American cop? I'll take soldier every time. You know what's sad is I've been told police agencies don't want to hire MPs because they're harder to retrain, yet time and time again, we prove them wrong by being better trained in humanitarianism. Well, clearly they're right, MPs are harder to retrain in their way. I was an MP and tried to become a civilian cop when I got out, but you gotta drink the Kool-Aid to be a cop in the 21st century. I got value out of my time as an MP, but I never got on board with the law enforcement subculture that has taken over the job. My brother and my best friend are police, and their whole identity is being a cop. From how they dress and what they watch and how they lean politically. Sheriff's deputy here, and I must say that I am disgusted by the unnecessary loss of life. There are moments that make me regret what I do, and this is one of them. I've met my share of racists wearing a badge, and I'm ready for a career change. The oath we take is to uphold the law and constitution, so for the officers on scene there that could have stepped in and prevented this. One bad apple always ruins the bunch, unfortunately. I pray for the George's family and that justice is served. Throwaway for obvious reasons, and yes, I'm a white male. Edit. Wasn't expecting this to blow up as it has. I'm responding to you guys when I can, and I'm glad we can have a conversation about this. We do not unionize in my state for law enforcement, and I see many comments about systemic protection and abuse. I have never worked under a police union, but I have worked with people who were unionized, and I have heard my share of stories where law is protected by the union. Stories I hear are about union protection from bad leadership, but I can imagine those protections may extend further in cases such as this. See, people say things like not all cops are bad, but based on what I've read in this sub, a lot of good cops quit because they get tired of the corruption and racism. The law enforcement system seems to filter out the good guys, and the jerks are overrepresented. As a son of a former police officer, my dad worked really hard to be an honest cop. His department was full of racists. They didn't like him because he was a decent cop, they couldn't do anything wrong on front of him. We saw the news together and I saw him wipe a tear, but tried really hard to hide it. I know he's sad and I don't want to push him to talk about it, but we both know things like this is always gonna happen, and that is a really sad fact. I can't possibly understand why a human being would do something like this. My grandfather was NYPD beat cop. Passed over for promotions and refused to have a partner when he could. Said it was because he found out that most other cops couldn't be trusted. He was on the force for nearly 35 years, from the time he got out of World War II to the early 90s. I've got a lot of family history with the NYPD and the FDNY. I had 4 cousins in the NYPD, all of them quit after saying cops are just too untrustworthy to be around. 3 of them joined up the FDNY instead. Now I got 9 cousins and 4 uncles on the FDNY, or formerly. I work for a US federal bureau, but I'm not a local police officer. All 4 cops need to go to jail. Derek Chauvin, the cop with the knee on George's neck, should have gone to jail long ago. The guy apparently has a history of doing this. This is his 3rd time in 15 years. Black people need to keep fighting and white Asian Latino people need to support them. Justice for cases like this won't come easy, and it won't come soon. But if they keep fighting, I truly believe that one day, eventually, it will come. My former local precinct. They did nothing except eat pizza and hang out at the gas station across from where this happened. The whole precinct needs to be investigated. They were never bothered with doing their job. He's killed 3 people in 15 years. In 2006, Derek Chauvin and 5 other police officers fatally shot a man named Wayne Reyes, who was fleeing police pursuit. In 2008, Derek Chauvin shot an unarmed man named Ira Latrell Tolles. Oh, so has a serial killer Lamau. I used to be a police officer. It was fucking embarrassing going out the day after something like this happened. One of the reason I quit was because I had no pride in my job anymore. For the people doubting if I used to be a cop or not, this is the only proof I really have. In order to get the police officer flare on our product Tanserve, you need to send the mods a pic of your police issued ID. Haven't been to that sub since before I quit, but here it is. I find it odd the police union itself never seems to feel this same sense of embarrassment about severe misconduct. That's the thing about good cops. They theoretically exist, but they very rapidly become former cops. I have a good friend that is a cop. We had a long discussion about good cops versus bad cops. I made the point that the bad cops seem to be able to get away with bad behavior all the time. They are never treated like everyone else, and police departments seem to bend over backwards to protect them. He said to the effect, well, it's a hard job and we all need to know the other guy has our back. If we turn on each other like that, then it destroys the trust. My response was basically, if that's the truth, then there is no such thing as good cops. If good cops protect the bad ones instead of going after them harder than they do other people, then they are worse than the crooked cops. If you're a cop, then just do your job. It doesn't matter if the guy is wearing a badge or not. If he's a piece of criminal, then arrest that piece of and put his ass away. Retired. It disgusts me as the job is difficult enough as it is, working mostly in sensitive neighborhoods. Brutality like this makes it far more difficult. How difficult was it for you to build community trust? Did you have to continuously fight against atrocities such as the recent cases, or was your community more sheltered from those issues? I worked in a place where the population was about 75% black. As a white cop, I very quickly learned a lot about being respectful and how to be tactful. Humor goes a long way, and it's very important not to give off any sign of being fearful. They can sense it. You get used to shouts of abuse as you drive by, and guys on the corner will try to provoke you by openly drinking beer. Is it illegal? Yes, but you learn to pick your battles. If you do ever need to stop someone and question them, you know that if you take too long, you will suddenly find yourself surrounded by an angry crowd who have no idea what you are asking. People in these areas are almost always reluctant to even be seen conversing with a cop out of fear of being seen as a snitch. It is true that if you do need to make an arrest, there will almost always be some level of resistance, which makes things very difficult, as once you have made the commitment to make the arrest, you have to go through with it. I am not in any way making excuses for the cops in this particular video, but it isn't easy. However, the cop with his knee on the poor guy appears to be of the alpha male type of cop. These guys are bullies by nature and very difficult to work with if you personally policed at different standards. It's very difficult to intervene as a partner, as you will likely be ostracized. You take this route and your career is over. Your social life is over. Your marriage will have problems as cop families are pretty close. Interesting last paragraph. Thanks for your perspective. Since we're tapping into the police community here, can someone please explain what, if anything, the bystanders could have done to help George Floyd? Call 911 and report police brutality. In all seriousness, what is the preventative action here, since none of the police officers on the scene, 4 of which were physically restraining him, reacted to his being murdered right in front of them? Edit. Thank you murder bimodum for this link a clue. I'm adding it to my post because I think others will appreciate it and I don't want it to get lost. Edit. In summary, some of the options proposed are below. I apologize if I omitted, misrepresented, or oversimplified anything. The bystanders in this case did many of these things, and they were a voice for George when he couldn't speak for himself. Always record the incident, live streaming if possible, and inform the police they are being recorded. Involve other authorities when applicable, such as police supervisors, state police, 911, ask for supervisor and an ambulance to report immediately. A clue, FBI. Tell the officers on site that you are involving other authorities. De-escalation. Back any crowd or bystanders away from the scene and officers while still being able to record the incident. Have one person, preferably a white person, attempt to approach the officers as a medical professional or voice of reason to explain that it appears that medical treatment may be required and remind the officers that their best interests, career, family, reputation, etc., are to act responsibly. Create a diversion distraction that requires the officers to release the hold, not custody, of anyone in imminent medical danger. Physically remove the threat imposed by the officers by force. This includes exercising your right to carry and discharge a gun. I think everyone agrees that this option will most likely result in physical, potentially fatal, and legal ramifications for the individuals involved unless the group of bystanders are organized enough and outnumber the officers on the scene to the extent that they can safely take control without further harm. Systemic change. Vote local and national for people that value human life and will implement change to protect it. This is not an anti-gun sentiment. If you value your right to carry a gun, then vote for people that support that. Be vocal in demanding justice when these incidents occur. Push for improved training, hiring practices, and accountability within the police force. I would imagine that this may also include increasing pay for the police force to attract more suitable individuals into the positions. Possibly implement a citizen-based governing body to oversee the police force and their actions.